At a logistics hub near the port of Tianjin, vast stacks of drums filled with tomato paste from Xinjiang now sit largely motionless. This facility was built to feed a global trade network. Chinese tomato concentrate would come in from the far west, be consolidated here, and then shipped through Tianjin to markets in Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. But since Italy began to turn away Chinese tomato products, that system has jammed. Italian food companies have tightened origin labeling rules and raised questions about alleged forced labor in Xinjiang. As a consequence, Chinese tomato exports have run into a wall. Tomato News, a specialist outlet that monitors the world's tomato processing industry, estimates that Chinese firms are currently stuck with 700,000 tons of unsold tomato paste, roughly half a year of exports piling up in storage. The statistical collapse is stark. In the third quarter of 2025, China's overall tomato paste exports were down 9% year-on-year. The shock was much more severe in Western Europe, where imports from China dropped 67%. Shipments to Italy, the most important European buyer, fell by 76%. According to Chinese customs data, between January and September 2025, the value of processed tomato exports to Italy plunged from more than $75 million in 2024 to under $13 million. Because of this, China's tomato processing sector has been forced to slash production. Output is expected to fall to around 3.7 million tons this year, compared with 11 million tons in 2024, a decline of more than half. As the Financial Times noted on 15 November, tomato cultivation and industrial processing in Xinjiang had expanded rapidly in recent years. Now, however, a large share of that output cannot find buyers in the Western European markets that used to absorb it. For years, China had competed aggressively on price. Italy was one of the main destinations for Xinjiang tomato paste, and Chinese products often sold for less than half the price of Italian-made goods. An industry insider speaking in May 2024 acknowledged that Italian processors had relied on Chinese tomato concentrate for over a decade. From 2000 to 2010, Chinese exports of canned tomato products to Italy surged by more than 250%. Beyond formal imports, substantial quantities of Chinese paste entered by sea were blended into local production and repackaged, then sold as Italian products. This was made possible by a regulatory loophole. EU and Italian rules required labels to identify where food was packaged, but not necessarily where the raw tomatoes were grown or processed. As a result, tins that appeared to be 100% Italian could, in reality, be partly or largely made from Chinese ingredients. Italian farmers and agricultural organizations began protesting against these cheap imports as early as 2015, but the issue exploded internationally in 2024 after a BBC investigation. The BBC's audio documentary, Blood on the Shelves, featured Uyghur interviewees who said they had been detained in Xinjiang and forced to pick tomatoes. According to the report, those tomatoes were processed, shipped to Italy, and ultimately ended up on supermarket shelves in the United Kingdom. The program triggered public pressure on retailers, who in turn demanded that Italian processors stop using tomato paste from China. This labor controversy unfolded against a wider backdrop of human rights concerns. On 7 December 2020, the European Union introduced a global human rights sanctions framework aimed at individuals and entities involved in serious abuses. On 22 March 2021, the EU used that mechanism to sanction 4 Chinese officials linked to policies in Xinjiang, accusing them of overseeing mass arbitrary detentions and systematic repression of Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities. Beijing denied all allegations. However, research by German scholar Adrian Zenz drew on internal Chinese documents, some marked confidential or top secret, that described strike hard and high-pressure campaigns, endorsed by Xi Jinping in 2014. Policy responses have varied across democracies. The United States has opted for a blanket ban on imports from Xinjiang, while the UK and EU still rely heavily on corporate due diligence and voluntary compliance. Even so, investigations continue to reveal links between Xinjiang-produced goods and Western consumer markets. In 2021, journalists from Canada and Europe found evidence that tomato products sold in some Canadian supermarkets could be traced back to Xinjiang. Their inquiry showed that multinational firms like Nestlé, Del Monte, and Unilever bought tomatoes from Chinese companies in Xinjiang, processed them in countries such as Pakistan, the Philippines, and India, and then re-exported the finished products globally. The backlash has not been limited to the West. That same year, Kagome, Japan's largest producer of tomato sauces and vegetable juices, announced that it had stopped buying tomato paste from Xinjiang. A Kagome spokesperson told Reuters that human rights concerns in the region were one factor behind this move, though not the sole reason. The human rights issues tied to tomato production are part of a broader pattern. China's prison and labor camp system has long been accused of using detainees as unpaid or extremely low-paid laborers to manufacture goods for both domestic use and export. One of the most striking revelations came in 2012 when Oregon resident Julie Keith discovered a handwritten plea for help tucked inside a box of Halloween decorations she had purchased. The letter, smuggled out of the Masanjia labor camp, described prisoners working up to 15 hours a day without rest days, facing beatings and torture for minor infractions, and earning just 10 yuan per month. Many of those imprisoned were practitioners of Falun Gong, a spiritual practice suppressed by the Chinese Communist Party since 1999. The author, a Falun Gong practitioner named Sun Yi, was later featured in the documentary Letter from Masanja, which went on to win international awards. The Italian reaction to Chinese tomato products is also driven by what critics call origin washing, disguising the true origin of ingredients. In 2021, Italian police raided a large food processing firm and confiscated several tons of tomato concentrate. Investigators found that Chinese paste had been mixed with locally produced tomatoes, but marketed as 100% Italian. The scandal sparked unease at home and abroad about how deeply Chinese tomato concentrate had penetrated European food supply chains. A BBC report on 1 December the following year revealed that UK retailers, including Tesco and Asda, were selling Italian-branded tomato sauces with 17 varieties suspected of containing Chinese tomatoes. Among them were products made by Italian processor Petit, which allegedly used tomato ingredients from Xinjiang shipped via Central Asia to Italy before being distributed across Europe. In response, Francesco Muti, head of the Italian company Muti, publicly criticized competitors for blending in cheaper Chinese paste while presenting their goods as premium Italian products. He argued that the scandal had dealt a double hit. Tomato prices had fallen, hurting farmers, while consumer trust in Italian brands was eroded. Muti, a 125-year-old family enterprise and the leading tomato processor in its region, produces passata, pulped tomato products, canned tomatoes, and more. As the firm's fourth-generation leader, Francesco Muti called on the European Union either to ban Chinese tomato paste altogether or to levy tariffs of around 60% to safeguard Italian agriculture. He welcomed the fact that Chinese tomato paste now faces greater obstacles when entering the Italian market. Farmers have not waited for Brussels to act. In 2024, the Italian Farmers Association Coldiretti organized nationwide demonstrations. Tractors blocked toll plazas and highways from the north to the south. In Parma, a long convoy of tractors rolled slowly through the roads, with farmers waving national flags and chanting, "No farmers, no food." In the countryside around Bologna, similar tractor parades snaked through rural lanes, displaying banners such as "Stop Unfair Competition" and "Protect Italian Agriculture." In May 2024, Coldiretti pushed for spot inspections of containers of Chinese tomato paste suspected of links to forced labor in Xinjiang. The following month, Luigi Pio Scordamaglia, the association's international affairs director, stated that more than 90% of Chinese tomatoes are grown in Xinjiang, where labor costs are very, very low, calling this situation unacceptable, both morally and economically. Chinese issues expert Xu Kuo has outlined several long-term risks for Beijing. First, tomato processors are facing higher input costs and collapsing export revenues, with some companies reportedly holding inventory sufficient for up to 2 years of sales, creating severe cash flow pressure. Second, farmers' incomes are falling, which may reduce planting areas in future seasons. Domestic consumption cannot absorb the oversupply in the short term. Third, if Brussels moves further toward bans or high tariffs, China's global position in tomato products could be seriously weakened. Industry figures talk about pivoting to Southeast Asian markets, but such a shift will not resolve the immediate crisis. Tomatoes are only one piece of a larger puzzle. Chinese agricultural goods have long raised alarms in Europe and North America over food safety. Under the Communist Party's governance, scandals involving contaminated or substandard food recur with disturbing frequency. Inside China, regulators are often seen as more lenient, with the result that domestic consumers are exposed to products that would not meet Western standards. Videos circulating online show farmers spraying unknown chemicals on vegetables just before harvest to keep them looking fresh longer. In another clip, a man stands in front of a mound of rotten apples destined for juice production and warns viewers not to drink cheap fruit beverages anymore. While China has made attempts to tighten inspection rules for exports, its agricultural products still struggle to pass the stringent safety and residue checks imposed by Western governments. As a result, many shipments are blocked or returned. Seafood provides another example. China is the world's largest exporter, but reports indicate that some vendors use anesthetic substances to sedate fish during transport to reduce mortality. One video shows large grass carp lying motionless in a truck after sedation, as workers scoop them out with nets. Eggs have also been under scrutiny. On 22nd of October 2024, EU authorities announced that eggs imported from China were rejected because residues of veterinary drugs, such as the antibiotic enrofloxacin, exceeded allowed levels. The affected consignments had been distributed to multiple countries, including Belgium, Croatia, Finland, France, Germany, Ireland, Norway, Poland, Spain, and Sweden, before being sent back. Chinese citizens reacted with alarm. Many pointed out that eggs intended for export are usually of higher quality than those sold domestically. If even those could not pass EU tests, what did that imply about the eggs people were eating at home? Studies have highlighted the widespread use of antibiotics in poultry farming, not only enrofloxacin, but also drugs such as metronidazole and doxycycline added to feed to prevent disease. Long-term exposure through food can weaken the immune system, especially in children, and damage organs such as the liver and kidneys. A study carried out by the School of Public Health at Fudan University examined 1,100 children in Shanghai's Jiading area and found that nearly 60% had detectable antibiotic residues in their bodies. If this is the case in a relatively prosperous district, conditions in poorer regions may be significantly worse. Many Chinese now say the question is no longer, is this safe to eat, but is there anything left that is safe at all? Even honey, one of China's proud export products, has not been spared. In June 2020, the century-old brand Baihua, 100 Flowers, was found to contain the banned veterinary drug norfloxacin. Consuming honey contaminated with this substance can harm the digestive system and internal organs. China is the world's largest honey exporter, with over 40% of exports going to Europe and North America. In April 2025, the European Union announced that it would update its pollutant limits, adding 27 new substances to its testing regime, many of them aimed at contaminants commonly found in Chinese goods. This is expected to result in numerous batches of Chinese honey being turned away at EU borders and could affect more than USD 1 billion in annual exports. Against this backdrop, several European countries have begun to rethink their economic ties with China. Yet critics argue that Europe still does not fully recognize the nature of the Chinese Communist Party's political system. Croatian MEP Stjepo Bartolika told U.S. media that while Central and Eastern European nations have already experienced life under communism, the Chinese people remain trapped in it. He described China as assertive and unapologetic in pursuing its ambitions, warning that Europe must not approach Beijing with naive assumptions. In his view, China is not simply a commercial rival, but a strategic threat, and European policy must be grounded in that reality. Tensions between Washington and Beijing, ranging from tariff disputes to broader geopolitical hostilities, have created persistent uncertainty for American firms operating within China's industrial ecosystem. As a result, many U.S. companies have begun distancing themselves from Chinese suppliers. After General Motors initiated major supply chain adjustments, Tesla has now emerged as the next major manufacturer, accelerating a strategic pullback from China. According to a Wall Street Journal report on November 15th, Tesla has instructed its supply partners to exclude Chinese-made components from any vehicles built in the United States. The company aims to eliminate all China-sourced materials within the next 1 to 2 years. Industry insiders claim that this decision was quietly adopted earlier in the year, largely in response to the severe logistical disruptions triggered by China's pandemic lockdowns. The shutdowns exposed the vulnerabilities inherent in relying heavily on Chinese suppliers. The U.S. China tariff battle further heightened Tesla's concerns, complicating pricing and cost management plans for its American operations. New geopolitical disputes have intensified these concerns. Recent friction between China and the Netherlands involving the semiconductor firm Nexperia disrupted chip supplies and reinforced the urgency for Tesla to diversify quickly. While China remains a critical manufacturing hub for the company, with Gigafactory Shanghai responsible for nearly half of Tesla's global shipments, Tesla's U.S. market relies entirely on local production. Reuters previously reported that Tesla had already begun shifting procurement toward North American suppliers over the past 2 years, anticipating tariff escalation. This move coincided with political pressure from former President Trump, who repeatedly pushed automakers to bring manufacturing back to the United States to avoid import penalties on vehicles and components. A major milestone in Tesla's diversification strategy occurred on November 4, 2025, when the company signed a multi-billion-dollar energy storage battery deal with Samsung SDI valued at 3 trillion Korean won, about USD 2 billion. The announcement sent Samsung SDI's stock soaring by 8%. This agreement marks a significant turn away from Tesla's long-standing dependence on Chinese battery giants, especially CATL, which has supplied nearly all Megapack cells since 2022. Tesla has now halted the use of CATL's lithium iron phosphate, LFP, cells in its U.S. factories and is preparing to manufacture its own LFP batteries domestically. A new plant in Nevada is scheduled to begin production in early 2026. Tesla's CFO, Vaibhav Taneja, reiterated in April that the company is intensifying efforts to secure non-Chinese supply channels. Despite its deep integration into China, boasting over 95% localization at Shanghai Gigafactory, Tesla is under mounting pressure. October sales figures from the China Passenger Car Association revealed a dramatic 35.8% year-on-year decline to 26,066 units, down from 71,525 the previous month. The company's market share in China's EV segment plummeted to 3.2%, the lowest in 3 years. Yet exports tell a different story. Tesla's October exports from China reached 35,491 vehicles, the highest in 2 years. The widening divergence between domestic sales and export performance highlights Tesla's growing need to reduce exposure to China while maintaining global output. Should Tesla eventually scale back its operations in China, several major consequences could follow. Economically, Tesla has been a driving force behind China's EV supply chain. A production halt in Shanghai would disrupt tens of thousands of jobs and destabilize upstream sectors, from batteries to chips to component suppliers, along with downstream networks such as sales and servicing. In terms of technological development, Tesla has long served as a benchmark for Chinese automakers, particularly in autonomous driving, battery management systems, and vehicle software. While Tesla's departure might ease competitive pressure locally, it could diminish technological collaboration and innovation pipelines, potentially weakening China's global positioning in EV technology. From a branding perspective, Tesla's presence has helped enhance the international credibility of China's EV industry. The company elevated consumer trust, encouraged adoption of new energy vehicles, and raised visibility for China as a manufacturing hub. A Tesla withdrawal could diminish the symbolic prestige associated with made-in-China EVs. Environmentally, Tesla has imposed high standards on sustainability, energy efficiency, and materials sourcing, pushing local suppliers such as CATL and Ganfeng Lithium to adopt greener practices. Without Tesla's influence, some firms may revert to more traditional, energy-intensive models, slowing China's broader transition towards sustainable mobility. Tesla is not alone in its attempt to reduce dependency on China. General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis are all pursuing similar strategies. Reuters reported on November 13th that GM instructed roughly 2,000 suppliers to relocate production outside of China by 2027, a directive that began quietly in late 2024 but intensified alongside rising U.S. China tensions. GM had already taken preparatory steps in 2023, particularly in semiconductors, battery materials, and rare earth supply. The global chip shortage underscored vulnerabilities in international supply chains. GM responded by securing future chip production capacity at GlobalFoundries' New York plant, reducing the diversity of chips used across vehicle models, and investing heavily in North American mineral resources. A notable example is GM's nearly USD 950 million joint venture with Lithium Americas to develop the Thacker Pass lithium mine in Nevada, expected to secure 2 decades of lithium supply. Ford has faced similar dilemmas. Although it initially partnered with CATL to build an LFP battery plant in Michigan, U.S. lawmakers raised national security concerns about Chinese involvement. Ford has since pursued agreements with suppliers in allied regions, including Canada, Australia, and Chile, to secure lithium, nickel, and cobalt for future EV production. The broader history of U.S. China commercial relations reveals a shift from tariff disputes in 2018 to a far more comprehensive strategic competition. What began as a trade war has evolved into conflict across technology, supply chains, manufacturing, and national security. U.S. policy now combines incentives for firms returning production home with penalties for those remaining in China. Decoupling is no longer rhetorical. It is visible in foreign investment flows. Companies such as Apple, Dell, and HP have shifted portions of their production to India, Vietnam, and Mexico. Apple, in particular, has increased iPhone production in India to over 16% of global output, with projections that all U.S. market iPhones may be India-made by 2026. Meanwhile, wider restrictions on China's semiconductor sector continue to reshape the landscape. Applied Materials, the world's largest semiconductor equipment manufacturer, announced that China-related sales are expected to fall sharply due to tightened export controls. Revenue from China has already dropped from 40% to around 25% of total sales. Beyond technology and manufacturing, numerous American consumer-facing companies, Starbucks, Best Buy, McDonald's, Amazon, Uber, and others, have reduced or restructured their presence in China. What began as a tech sector decoupling has now expanded into retail, services, and lifestyle industries. For ordinary Chinese consumers, These shifts translate into rising costs for electronics, vehicles, and daily goods. One social media commentator warned that if foreign brands truly withdrew, even domestic cars could become unaffordable due to lack of competition, leaving many citizens unable to buy private vehicles at all. Economists argue that the de-risking narrative promoted by the Biden administration is gradually morphing into full-scale decoupling, extending from advanced technology to minerals and basic manufacturing inputs. Both sides are reducing mutual dependence despite occasional short-term diplomatic thawing. Scholars such as Wang Guan and Sun Mingguang emphasize that U.S. China relations have entered a structural realignment. Political unpredictability, military tensions in the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea, and new U.S. legislation such as the Inflation Reduction Act and CHIPS and Science Act all contribute to an environment where companies see diversification not as an option, but as a necessity. As global supply chains reorder themselves, the United States appears to hold several strategic advantages: control over advanced semiconductor technologies, influence over allied countries, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and increasing ability to coordinate supply chain shifts. China, facing mounting isolation in high-tech sectors, may find itself pushed toward a more inward-looking economic model that could struggle to sustain long-term growth. Whether Tesla fully retreats from China remains uncertain, but the trajectory is undeniable. The global manufacturing map is being redrawn, and the momentum is moving away from China at a pace not seen in decades.